surprised me that we cut out 2 songs and, all that.
Yeah.
I had the red block staring at me the entire time, like,
I remember thinking at one point, I bet it's probably getting late. Yeah, whatever.
Can we have the same songs next week? One of my favorite hymns.
Oh, holy.
I'm out this
all right.
morning.
Holy,
So you're talking too long.
I did
Yeah.
find out that June is doing better.
Good.
Anyway,
And Debbie's living with her, so
And-
she doesn't have to live with her help.
today we will talk about Jehovah's Witnesses, and then we'll go through some case studies. We have been responding to various forms of unbelief for some time now. We got our AICP method under our belts, and have been employing it against all various kinds of unbelief. And they all fall to it, very much in the same way. They're either arbitrary, inconsistent, have terrible consequences, or cannot justify the preconditions of intelligibility, or all four. So our final lecture, like I mentioned, we're going to do some case examples, take questions. If there's something that you've encountered that we may not have covered or something that you want clarification on, please do mention that as we go along. After we finish up with set examples. Jehovah's Witnesses, like I mentioned first, there wasn't anything in Bonton's notes on them, but if someone's going to come knock on your door, it's going to be the Mormons or the Jehovah's Witnesses. It'd be good to be able to talk to them, so we'll do that for a minute. We'll let Donald and Connell help us out with them here at the end. That will not be streamed. You can find that at the Lutheran Satire page. Anybody who's watching the live stream, if you wanted to know. So look up Donald and Connell with 1 L for each of their names and Jehovah's Witnesses. So, let's talk about Jehovah's Witnesses.
Just as winter boots.
Yes, Jemima's wildebeest. Wow, Jehovah's Witnesses. What kind of religion are they? First, there were 3 different categories that we talked about for religions, right? We have religions of transcendent mysticism. That was the first one. What was the primary example that we used for a religion of transcendent mysticism?
Buddhism.
Let's see.
Buddhism is one of the categories of the next one.
Beyond man's experience and I have beyond rejection of logic.
Those are some examples and problems with them.
They
Like
will-
a
They will
category
give
of them,
up.
or characteristic rather of them.
It's a
But
world,
a particular religion, what is, I would say,
world view.
Hinduism. Hinduism is the number 1 religion in the world that fits into the category of transcendent mysticism. Hare Krishnas, for all practical purposes, you can consider them a denomination of Hinduism. The refutation for them is going to be the same as it is for a Hindu. A religion of immanent moralism is another category of them. Tony gave one of them. Buddhism is a religion of immanent moralism. Instead of going with the transcendent, it's moral of the here and now, and there's a moral code of some sort that you need to follow in order to live your life right and to go into whatever state of peace or afterlife that they believe in. Buddhism is one of them. Confucianism, Karma is related to it, yes. In many cases.
LDS.
In Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, I believe, Shintoism, I think, is one we mentioned.
Mormon.
The third category is biblical counterfeits. The biblical counterfeits are those that have a very strong association with the Bible. They look like they were trying to ape it or take something from it and run in their own direction with it. The 2 examples that we gave of these, we gave a polytheistic example and a Unitarian example for a biblical counterfeit. Our polytheistic example was what? Mormonism, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The Unitarian example as opposed to Trinitarian, because Christianity is Trinitarian, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, one God, 3 persons. The Unitarian example that we've already talked about is Islam. We spent some time talking about them last week and recommended a book, What Every Christian Needs to Know About the Quran by Dr. James R. White. Fantastic book. I heartily recommend it. But we have Jehovah's Witnesses now falling into what? What are they? They're one of the last. They're the biblical counterfeit is what they are. Because they have their own errant translation of the Bible. They call it the New World Translation. And it has some very glaringly obvious errors in it that support their heretical positions, a couple of which we're going to cover. By the way, who else has a Bible translation akin to this? They take their own Bible translation for it. Remember that. We mentioned a moment ago. The Mormons have the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Joseph Smith translation, which is really goofy, because Joseph Smith is very conveniently prophesied in the end of Genesis 50, but in their particular translation. But moving on from there, a really important feature, and that serves as a useful refutation for the Jehovah's Witnesses, is the failed 1914 prophecy. The failed 1914 prophecy. The Jehovah's Witnesses, in their short existence, have more than one failed prophecy, But the epic face plant that happened in 1914 is probably the most destructive to their credibility. We'll talk about it and we'll give a little bit of background for the Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses are also known as the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Charles Taze Russell was their founder, and he predicted in 1914 that we would see the end of what he called the Gentile times. He based it on interpretation of Daniel 4 and Luke 21:24, did some math with some years. It was kind of weird. Anyway, they initially taught that the year 1914 would bring three very important events. And it's over 100 years ago. So this is what they thought. First of all, 1914 would bring about the Battle of Armageddon. They literally taught this. They also taught that it would bring about the destruction of worldly governments. And kind of related to that, they also taught, Charles Taze Russell specifically taught, that it would bring about the full establishment of God's kingdom on earth. As I mentioned, Russell calculated in 1914 using a complex interpretation, used some sort of weird biblical chronology. Nebuchadnezzar's reign was involved with it the 7 times in Daniel 4, landed in October of 1914. Okay. This prophecy was heavily promoted in their publications, including one called Studies in the Scriptures. So, this is the prophecy. These three things happened in 1914, October specifically. So, well, what happened? Well, what did happen in 1914 that was a worldwide significance? History people. World War I started in 1914. That's kind of a big deal. The Jehovah's Witnesses pointed that and said, hey, look, hey, we're right about this.
They were surprised.
Maybe. But here's the problem. Were they right about that? No. That's why they weren't right about that. Armageddon didn't occur. World governments were not destroyed, and the kingdom wasn't visibly established. Armageddon didn't occur. We're all still here. We still have world governments, and we have people with various governments fighting about various things all the time.
When was the prophecy? What was it made?
When did he give it? I think he gave. I don't remember exactly
Did
when.
he give it like 6 months before World War?
I don't think so. No, I forget exactly when it was that he declared it. But the fact that he promised that all these things were going to be happening in 1914 is the focal point. I don't remember when he gave the prophecy specifically. But this is kind of a big deal. None of that happened, and it's extremely embarrassing. Charles Taze Russell died in 1916, so the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society decided it would be a good idea to adjust the prophecy.
Convenient.
Kind of like what the Mormons did. Remember when they moved to the original city of Zion and they encountered resistance and had to move west afterwards? Wow, I thought this was where the kingdom of God was going to be set up. Convenient that you can change those kinds of things. But, hey. Another guy, by the 1920s, a guy by the name of Joseph Rutherford, who's the other significant figure in the Jehovah's Witnesses founders. You have Charles Taze Russell, you have Joseph Rutherford. He and the Watchtower Society reframed the 1914 prophecy. They decided that 1914 was actually when Jesus began his invisible presence, they said. His parousia, in that case, if he's to borrow a biblical term. So he's ruling from heaven, and Armageddon is still in the future scene. The physical end becomes a later event, while 1914 marks a spiritual shift. Of course, that doesn't work. The reason it doesn't work is because this is really to be nothing more than a rescue device. The original prophecy called for literal fulfillment of the aforementioned things, not a figurative one. Charles Taze Russell, therefore, was a false prophet. And what they did is change their prophecy later on to try to save face from the obvious failed predictions. It's meant to cover up a lie. This was something that they were able to get away with much, much more easily before the internet became a really big thing. Because if people aren't actually, can't just go to some AI or Google or whatever and look up anything and have hundreds of hits in less than a second and find out what's really going on with all this stuff, you might be able to keep people in the dark more easily. Can't do that now. It is absolutely impossible to hide these things. So what we need to do, of course, is simply point to Deuteronomy 13, Deuteronomy 18, and we've been able to dismiss their founders entirely. They've already been shown to be false prophets. And because of that, it ends up refuting their entire religion. Deuteronomy 18:22, when a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the word does not come to pass or come true, that is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You need not be afraid of him. And that's really a complete refutation. Game over, guys. Why are we still talking about you? As I mentioned, This prophecy does serve as some embarrassment to Jehovah's Witnesses. But something else I'm sure you're also aware of. Kingdom halls still exist. The Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses, there's still those around. As I mentioned when we started our class, if someone's going to come knocking on your door, they're either going to be a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness. They still go around and tell people about their false message. The darkness of sin and power of false religion is great indeed. The blinders are impressive. It's also why we need to rely on the power of the Spirit, as we've been talking about throughout the entire course. In order for someone's blinded eyes to be open, to tell them the truth, we refute their falsehood, but pray mightily to the Spirit of God to open their eyes and see it. Because if he doesn't, they won't. Jehovah's Witnesses, because of this alone, are really great examples of that. A few other interesting facts about them. What else do we know about the Jehovah's Witnesses? Well, they believe that only a literal 144,000 people are actually going to go to heaven.
I never got that.
Right.
I never got that.
Now, they do believe that everybody else who's, right with God and the Jehovah's Witness message, they get to be part of the crowd that are going to inherit a paradise earth. They don't get to experience the ultimate of heaven.
Yeah,
Only 144,000
is full. So
Yeah, it's been full for a long time. Now, there are those who would tell you that there are some who, kind of fell away and they're not necessarily part of it. Other people might have gotten in. But the reality is there's really no way that anybody who's a Jehovah's Witness today has any real hope of being part of 144,000. They just don't. It's like, so why are y'all doing this?
paradise earth.
That must be why. Maybe. They also won't take literature from you. They want you to take theirs, but they won't take yours. I've always found that interesting.
But that number is in the Bible, right?
It is. That number is in Revelation chapter 6, I believe. The 144,000 seal, Revelation 6 and 7. And who it's referring to is not the Jehovah's Witnesses 144,000. It's not. But that's
Right.
it is a matter of interest and interpretation depending on your eschatological position. I would maintain that it's a representative of people that were escaping Jerusalem when it fell back in 70. But see, they also do not celebrate holidays. They don't like Christmas. They don't celebrate birthdays, that kind of thing. Kind of a bum deal, really. But this last one is more important than all the rest. They deny the Trinity. Big fail. They believe Jesus is the Archangel Michael. He's a created being. Jesus is not God, the one true God, Yahweh. He is the Archangel Michael. So this is why alone is reason enough to evangelize them. As you probably heard Kip and I say before, in order to be considered part of the faith once delivered, you have to have at least two things right. First of all, you need to have the right God. That's kind of a big deal. You have the wrong God, they don't have the right God here, then you're not in the faith because you're worshiping the wrong God. And secondly, you have to have the right gospel. You have to have the right message of salvation. If you don't have that, then obviously you're not telling people the right way to be saved, and there is no salvation for them. So Jehovah's Witnesses and Muslims and Mormons fail at both of those situations. Roman Catholics fail at the second, and so do Eastern Orthodox. So we refute the errors of the Jehovah's Witnesses with the purpose in mind to share with them the truth of the triune God of Scripture and the one gospel of Jesus Christ. Part of their denial of the Trinity is a claim that the Bible never refers to Jesus as Jehovah or Jesus as Yahweh. They claim that the Bible never says that Jesus is Yahweh or Jehovah. And they're always going to use the term Jehovah. They won't use the term Yahweh. But that's just how they do things. They have the reasons for it, which are, I don't really care. Jehovah, Yahweh, we're talking about the one true God. And they deny that Jesus is that person. Now, this point is how we're going to work through a primary refutation involving an internal critique. Their own text, even their own translation, will prove to be their undoing on this particular issue. Because you cannot escape the reality that Jesus is Yahweh. Jesus is Jehovah, the one true God. Now, the refutation begins. Probably the most common text people go to talk to Jehovah's Witnesses is John 1:1. It establishes Jesus to be God. Now, the New World Translation renders it differently. The text doesn't say what the Jehovah's Witnesses say it does, but they're probably more prepared for this particular text than they are any other text you might raise with them. This is the one that they're training their people to go around and talk about because it is one that is brought up so very often by evangelical Christians to respond to them. Even so, it's very much worth considering and knowing what they have to say about it. John 1:1-3 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him. Without him, not anything made, was not anything made that was made." Okay. It clearly teaches that the Word who the scripture identifies as Jesus was and is God. The God. Inescapable, really. But now for the same text in the New World Translation. That's what their translation says. See a problem? That's kind of a big deal.
Hey, God.
That's what their New World Translation says. John 1:1. That's what it says. A God. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was a God. This is a serious problem. Now they do this to try to distinguish Jesus from the one true God. But the thing is, and we'll see this in the Colin Donald video we'll watch later, but this is how you say the word was God in Greek. It's just how you have to do it. The noun that gets the definite article in this case is the subject, the word, and the term God is describing it. This is how you do it. The lack of the article in Greek in some cases can bring with it the understanding of an indefinite case, because they don't have an indefinite article like a or am. Greek doesn't have that. It says the definite article, the. But that's not the case here.
This is an intransitive verb. And so with an intransitive verb, you have to, in order to, because both subject and the predicate nominative are going to be in the nominative case. In order to determine which is which, you
You assign the definite article to the subject.
yes, and the others in Arthurus. So
And Arthurus just means without the article.
I can't think of the word predicate nominatives. I don't know what the problem is.
We're both tired.
Yeah.
But in any case, that is true. But honestly, even without that particular Greek tidbit, there's something else that's kind of a big deal. This issue called monotheism. That is the obvious problem. One of the most, maybe the most foundational belief in Christianity is monotheism. There is one God. Just one. And pretty much everything in the Bible from Genesis to Revelation brings that to bear. Deuteronomy 6:4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Isaiah 45:18 through 22 is another important text. For thus says the Lord who created the heavens. He is God, who formed the earth and made it. He established it. He did not create it empty. He formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is no other. I do not speak in secret in a land of darkness. I did not say to the offspring of Jacob, seek me in vain. I, the Lord, speak the truth. I declare what's right. Assemble yourselves and come. Draw near together, you survivors of the nations. They have no knowledge who carry about their wooden idols and keep on praying to a God that cannot save. Declare and present your case. Let them take counsel together. Who told this long ago? Who declared it of old? Was it not I, the Lord, capital L-O-R-D, Yahweh or Jehovah? And there is no other God besides me, a righteous God and a Savior. There is none besides me. Turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth. For I am God, and there is no other. Can we be any clearer than that? As I mentioned, part of the text from the Isaiah passage I just read uses God's proper name, which is important, and we will use that in the case later on to refute another part of their teaching. But first, another important text and a refutation of their interpretation of it, as well as how their so-called translation renders it. This text, Colossians 1:15 through 17. We've used this text a few times in other apologetic discussions throughout our course. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things. And in him all things hold together. This is the word where they get stuck on, by the way, the issue with the word firstborn. Well, firstborn means you have to come from somewhere. It's a good part of creation because it's the firstborn of creation. No, that's not what that means. We read the rest of it. Everything is created through Jesus. Well, here's what the Jehovah's Witnesses do with this. Again, they have a doctrine which teaches that Jesus is not the one true God. He was the first created being. This is what they say. He's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, because by means of him all other things were created in the heavens and on the earth. Things visible, things invisible. Whether they are thrones or lordships or governments or authorities, all other things have been created through him and for him. Also, he's before all other things. By means of him, all other things were made to exist. They put another word in there. Another other. Four of them, as a matter of fact, in that passage. Now, this word other was inserted by the New World Translation. How many Greek manuscripts do you suppose they had to support having the word other in this text?
I'm looking at it now.
Here's a hint. They don't have any.
Goose eggs.
Zero. Kind of like the problem with the Mormons, kind of like the issue with the Muslims who said that we have corrupted New Testaments. Which means they have no evidence of this at all. But they need it in order to hold up their belief. Because if Jesus really did create all things, then he is the one true God. But if you believe that he's the Archangel Michael, you can't have that. You need this to say this. But there's no Greek manuscript for it. Therefore, there's no proof of it. Therefore, their claim is what? Their claim is arbitrary. Purely arbitrary. They have no justification for it at all.
It's even worse than arbitrary. It's just intentional deception. It's just a lie.
It is a lie.
But, I mean, it's an arbitrary lie. It's true. It's a lie.
Once again, AICP. You have any proof of that? No. I don't have a reason to believe this is what it said at all. Because I can show you manuscript after manuscript after manuscript
There's no variant.
of how it renders it. There's no variant. This is what it says. This is the manuscript tradition of Colossians. It's not what you all make it out to be. It's just not. But it has to say that. Why? Because Jesus is the Archangel Michael. Oh, he is. How do you know that? Funny. This teaches that he's the one true God. So they got hung up on that word firstborn. I mentioned that, right? So what does firstborn mean? Well, firstborn doesn't necessarily mean first created. In fact, I don't think it ever does. The idea of firstborn, in the mind of the Apostle Paul, an Israelite man of great knowledge of the Old Testament, will have this kind of a backdrop to it. Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 15 to 17, says this: if a man has two wives, the one loved and the other unloved, and both the loved and unloved have borne him children, and if the firstborn son belongs to the unloved, then on the day when he assigns his possessions as an inheritance to his sons, he may not treat the son of the loved as the firstborn in preference to the son of the unloved, who is the firstborn. But he shall acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the unloved, by giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the firstfruits of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. The firstborn gets double inheritance rights and gets that kind of recognition. That's the idea. That is the important thing we need to keep in mind. And that's buttressed even more with the concept in Hebrews. Huh?
I was asking if she was taking notes.
Yeah. Anyway, this important concept is reinforced even more so from Hebrews 1:1 and 2. Speaking about Jesus long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things. Through him also he created the world. So he appointed Jesus the heir of all things. That's what the issue of first point is referring to. Inheritance, being the heir of all things. That's what it means. Well, that's great. So their failed prophecy really makes them look silly. They abuse Colossians chapter 1. So how do you prove that Jesus actually is Yahweh? That's what you're thinking, right? I hope that's what you're thinking, because that's what we're doing next. Anyway, now you're thinking it. There are two very important texts that we're going to go to that demonstrate this without any question at all. And you can use the Jehovah's Witnesses New World Translation to do it, which is why it's really important. This is how you do internal critique, right? You take your own material, you show them, look, this is where it falls apart. This one's my personal favorite. Well, they're both really good. John 12:37 through 41. John 12:37 through 41. Critically important. Keep this in mind. Here's what it says. Though he being Jesus, had done so many signs before them, they still did not believe in him, so that the words spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. Lord, who's believed what he heard from us? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? Therefore, they could not believe. For again, Isaiah said, he's blinded their eyes and hardened their heart, lest they see with their eyes and understand with their heart and turn, and I will heal them. Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke of him. I forgot I had this on the screen. There it is. All right. There's the important one, the important verse right there. So the question is then, whose glory did he see? Whose glory did Isaiah see? Right? Now, in the context of John, well, let's ask this question first. What is John citing? What is John citing in verse 40? He says, quote, he's blinded their eyes and hardened their heart, lest they see with their eyes and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them. he's citing this, Isaiah 6:10. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and be healed. All right. So then you ask the question, okay, he's citing Isaiah 6. So whose glory did Isaiah see? If you look back a few verses in chapter 6, you see the same event in Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 5. Isaiah 6, 1 through 5, which says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up. The train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim, each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face. With 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is Yahweh of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me. This is Isaiah speaking. Woe is me. I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, Yahweh of hosts. So in Isaiah, it is very evident that the prophet Isaiah saw Yahweh's glory. That is Jehovah's glory. That's why you have Lord in caps if you look at the passage. But who does John say Isaiah saw? Ooh. He says he saw his glory. And who's John referring to in his text? Jesus. John says Isaiah saw Jesus' glory. Isaiah says he saw Yahweh's glory. It can't be separated. This is a slam dunk as far as I'm concerned. A powerful inconsistency you can show the Jehovah's Witnesses from their own New World Translation. John 12, Isaiah 6. You were going to say something.
No, I just saying boom.
It is.
No,
That's game over. But there's another one. There are 2 that do this.
they're actually, yeah.
That I can think of off the top, that I thought off the top of my head when I was doing this. But this next one hits them twice in the same passage. We've already been in Hebrews 1 a little bit. Let's go back to it. Hebrews chapter 1, verses 8 through 12. Father speaking. But of the Son, he says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. You've loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. And you, Lord, laid the foundations of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment. Like a robe, you will roll them up. Like a garment, they will be changed, but you are the same, and your years have no end. All right? This text cites 2 different psalms. And together they provide a powerful refutation of the Jehovah's Witness position that Jesus is not Yahweh. First is Psalm 45. The first text is Psalm 45, where it says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of your kingdom is a scepter of uprightness. You've loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. All right. Your throne, O God. The Son is called God. Jesus is God. Easy, right? That's not Yahweh. That's not the word that's used there. Okay? That's fine. Because there's more. The writer of Hebrews cites 2 psalms here. This is the other one. Of old, you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain. They'll all wear out like a garment. You'll change them like a robe, and you'll pass away. But you are the same, and your years have no end. All right, so there's a you here. You laid the foundations of the earth, the text tells us in Psalm 102. Referenced again in Hebrews 1, 8 through 12. To whom does the you refer? The answer to that question is earlier in Psalm 102, as you might expect it to be. The you is told us in verses 18 through 22. Let this be recorded for a generation to come, so that a people yet to be created may praise Yahweh. That he looked down from his holy height. From heaven, Yahweh looked at the earth to hear the groans of the prisoners, to set free those who are doomed to die, that they may declare in Zion the name of Yahweh, and in Jerusalem his praise. When peoples gather together in kingdoms to worship Yahweh. That's Psalm 102, 18 through 12. So you get your antecedents for the word you here, which is what Hebrews 1, 8 through 12 cites, and that's going to be Yahweh. There's no question about it. And who are we talking about? once again, we're talking about Jesus. The writer of Hebrews, by citing Psalm 102 and Psalm 45, calls Jesus Yahweh or Jehovah. John called him Jehovah. The writer of Hebrews calls him Jehovah. Let's see where is it? There we go. The Psalm 102 says that Yahweh is the one who did all those things. Those two texts, Psalm 12, well, I guess 4 texts. Not Psalm 12, forgive me. John 12 with Isaiah 6. Hebrews 1 with Psalm 102, especially, will provide from their own copy of the scriptures, their new or twisted translation. But if you had a chance to sit down with Jehovah's Witness like we have your New World Translation, yeah, well, let's look at John 12 real quick. You don't believe, because you don't believe that Jesus is Yahweh. No, we believe he's a created being. Okay, well, compare that with what John is referring to in Isaiah 6. Who did John say Isaiah saw? Who did Isaiah see? That's pretty powerful. And it takes their false doctrine and throws it into the bus. That internal critique will take that away. And of course, as we talked about, we have the 1914 false prophecy, which is also very important. So that's what I was going to mention with regard to Jehovah's Witnesses. Questions or comments?
So, what do they say when you say that back to them? Point these things out. Do they just change
I
the
have to go.
subject, or?
Yeah, usually is that we'll have to go, we'll come back and talk about it. And they usually show up with one senior person and one like trainee. And the senior person's responsibility is like getting them out the door without, and then if they actually do come back, they'll usually be the senior trainer in an elevator. And my experience has been that guy is really belligerent. Like he sees you as a threat or whatever, and
You are a threat.
Yeah.
We really are. We're showing them that they're false.
and they will kind of get at you. And then if you're not compliant to them, they won't come. Like if you push back, they'll stop. Okay, well, thank you very much, and then they won't come back. Now they have it.
Your house off, at least don't go here.
We're definitely not going there. Yeah, well, one of their teachings as a church is they have a big thing about being persecuted. So like they have a persecution complex. Like if you say anything to challenge what they sort of see it as blessed are those who are persecuted.
Sure.
And so I've always once I figured that out, I've always tried to be overly nice to them, and just and just refute that. And there are a number of other ways that you can go about doing it. I had them tied up with Hebrew one time, showing them that Jehovah can't possibly be the name of God, because that particular word was not even in existence until like the 16th century, or the 12th century, or something like that.
Latinization of
Yeah,
Adonai, right?
yeah, and it took the vowel pointers off of Adonai in the Hebrew and put them on the Tetragrammaton in the YHWH, and then you come up with Jehovah. Well, Jah is not even in the Hebrew alphabet. There's no phonetic pronunciation for Jah in Hebrew, so it's James, not James. It's Yeshua, not Joshua.
Right.
And it's not. It would be Jehovah if it were that, but it's not, because it doesn't have those vowel pointers. But anyway, it was that particular person. He came to my house a couple times alone, which my understanding is you're not supposed to do that ever. But he did, and we actually started having a pretty good discussion. And he invited me to church one day with him. So I said, sure, why not? They got out and they went in the afternoon. So we got out here and I ran over there. And I walked in the door, and all of a sudden, like, I'm surrounded by dudes. Like, who's this guy? Hi, who are you? How are you doing? This sort of thing. They were very kind of suspicious, but they seated me next to Mike once they found out Mike sort of vouched for me. That was his name. And I watched their service. It was very entertaining. And they actually, I will say this, they have a very good pedagogical method. They know how to teach well. What they're teaching is absolute garbage, but they know how to teach very well. And so that was interesting. And from then on, I never talked to him again. He never came back. Was never allowed.
Oh, they did.
Yeah, they kind of avoid or try to sidestep those things usually, and then they try to call in an elder. I've had that happen on a couple different occasions.
Well, I would imagine if somebody's making sense, they definitely don't want any trainees hearing that.
Sure.
Because to give them ideas and them start questioning, well, why didn't you have an answer for that? Or why don't we have an answer for that? Or
Or the
that
reason why
guy's
they
making
won't take any
sense.
literature.
So the very first time I got visited by a Jehovah's Witness was this older lady named Dolores and a young guy that she was training. And Jake was probably 2 at the time, and I put him in the room watching Rescue Heroes on cartoon because I didn't want him hearing all this stuff. Anyway, we were talking. I had honestly didn't know a whole lot about him. I knew some things, and so I just let him just take the lead and explain the theology. And one of the things that shocked me at that time that I was not aware of is they don't believe in hell. They don't believe
Yeah,
that.
they're annihilations.
Yeah, they don't believe that we have a soul. They believe we are a soul. That's how they'll put it. What they mean by that is there's no immaterial spirit of part of us. And I forget what it was that they were reading now, but it was in the book of Job somewhere. And they had taught that. They asked me about that, about the spirit. They told me that there's no such thing as the spirit of man or whatever. And we're reading in the book of Job about some other thing that they were trying to show. And all of a sudden, the guy that was next to him, because I had given him a little pushback on that, the guy said, "Oh wait, here's something that says the spirit of man." It's it's in Job, in the book of Job. Like I didn't bring it up, like they were doing it. And so she saw that this thing was falling apart pretty quickly, and she scuttled him out of there, and then eventually brought some other elder in. And again, he was kind of belligerent with me, and so was the guy that came with Mike the second time. But yeah, it was that was interesting to me. In my actual in the moment response when I found out they didn't believe in hell, they believe that people who are not saved are annihilated. They're just snapped out of existence. My initial in the moment response was, "How could God be so unloving?" And she looked at me. She was like, "What do you mean?" I said, "There are victims to people's sin on earth, and you're telling me that the perpetrators of the crimes against those victims
Just get to die.
they just get to be wiped out of existence. They would get this. They don't have. There's no justice in that. How can God say that He loves those victims?" And she. That's a really interesting question. And I mean, I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense to me. There has to be a hell in order for there to be love.
Yeah.
There has to be a hell in order for there to be justice. And that was an interesting epiphany to me. I didn't even know they didn't believe in hell. So yeah, sorry.
That was great. But my experience has been, at least when I bumped into a few on the street last time, I was talking to Jehovah's Witnesses on the street, aside from making them angry with my loudspeakers saying that they were teaching the false God at the Roman Catholic event, but kind of tired of me looking for one of them. What is it? But a couple of young ladies, Josiah and I were downtown. We were going back from the stop at the State House, I think. And I forget how the conversation started, but they were walking by and they had this little cart behind them because of the literature, right? Let's stop and talk to them for a minute. They said they were in a hurry. It's like, "Oh, wait, you guys are Jehovah's Witnesses?" "Oh, yeah, we are." It's like, "Oh, could I talk to the text of scripture real quick?" "Well, sure." So I opened up John's well. And I went to that and I took him to Isaiah 6. "Well, what do you think about that?" "Well, this John says Isaiah saw. It saw Jesus." "Well, what does Isaiah 6 say?" "Well, it saw Yahweh." So you don't believe Jesus is Yahweh, then, do you? It's like, "No, we don't." "Oh, how would you do that then?" So that's a really good question. We really do have to go with them. That's kind of
We really do have to go. That's it.
because there's no answer to it.
Right.
Because that by itself refutes their position.
Yeah.
Well, I know that when they come to my house, there was these 2 ladies that kept coming to my house. And I probably told them that my son was a Baptist preacher. I haven't seen him since, but but they just gave me the Watchtower. They didn't even go to the Bible. It's always they wanted me to read the Watchtower, and they wanted to talk about that. And to me, it was like a lot of emotional
Oh, it
feelings,
is,
and I'm going,
They show you a picture of people of color and women, and they'll talk about injustice. So
Yeah.
they're playing off of the woke sort of thing.
so I was thinking that's not the way to go to people's houses. If you want to spread the gospel, anyway, I was just surprised they didn't come back anymore. But
You kind of get put on a blacklist
well, that's okay.
if you
That
make
happens.
It does. I haven't had Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons come to my house in years.
I had one come last summer, and I asked them if they knew Mike Hader, which is this guy's name. And they were like, "Oh yeah, we know Mike," and then I never saw him after that. I don't know if they went back and talked to
Mike's
him.
like, "Hey, we went to this guy's house." No, don't go back to him.
And back in the day, people would tell you, don't take their literature or they'll come back.
That's what I want to
Why don't
happen.
they come back? Please come back.
They can come back. We'll see.
But I don't
We
think
kind of do
they
what
did,
Monson did with the Mormons because he was talking with them and like oh, we're talking about another testament of Jesus Christ. He's like, "Oh, sure, I'd love to talk about religion." Invites him in and then refutes what they say. He's like, "Well, you guys believe in the laws of God." It's like, "Oh, no, we don't." Well, I can tell somebody about that. And they came and said, "Okay, so we do believe in the law of God. Just one God in this world." So he talks to them for a while, refutes him.
Wait a minute, I know what you believe better than you know what you believe.
Well, and then what he said in this, he said, when you talk about the fact that Mormons are polytheists, it's like that's a surprise to a lot of people I know, including some of the Mormons that come to my door.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Wow. But one thing that he did as an appeal, because they were getting frustrated, not getting anywhere with him, it's like, I'm not sure we're going to come back to something. Well, don't you believe that I have a false belief about God? Well, yes. Well, don't you care about my soul? Do you want to come back and talk to me some more and try to convince me? I'd love to talk with you all some more.
Yeah, I'm not
I'm not trying to
persecuting
do emotional manipulation, but that's a straight up fact. If you really
Yeah.
care for my soul, I mean, you want more opportunity to tell about the true gospel, of course.
I remember one time we were up at, we were visiting Darren and his family up in, I think it was when they were in Columbia City. Maybe not, but we were out on the back porch. He was grilling some hamburgers. All of a sudden, these two guys walk up, two young guys,
Are you kidding?
elders, and I was like,
Oh my God.
"We're gonna have
At the
dinner
gas
and
station
lunch
in
at the
West
same
Virginia,
time."
Did you give them a hamburger and they?
It was a good discussion. It was really, but it was the same sort of thing. We sort of look. We're gonna be honest with you.
Yeah.
It's like we know a little bit about Mormonism, and I want to know what you guys believe about this. And so we started digging into their theology, the various different levels of heaven and this sort of thing. And why don't you believe this? It was very fun. And then we went over to the Francis' house one time. They invited some Mormons in, and got to share the gospel at their house with Mormons. Then we were eating dinner with John and Angie and a couple of Kirby salesmen came, and we got to share the gospel with the Kirby salesmen.
Hey, the Kirby salesman hawking something more realistic than the
Okay.
Mormons and the Jacobs. So
This is true.
at least they have something substantial they're trying to offer you, right? This will clean your carpet.
Those end up costing your.
It'll cost you your arm and a leg to get it, but it'll
Well,
work.
what was funny is they were like, they brought out they said, "Can you bring out your vacuum?" And we have a Kirby, so we brought it out. Yeah. Oh,
Yep.
we had one because I think you gave it to
Yeah.
us. They do. Yeah.
All right. Now,
Anyway, sorry.
now we carry on because we are carrying on. All right, let's use some examples. Let's go over a few things, some in-class exercises, if you will. What I have done is, well, let's just go through my slides. When we analyze anything, I don't care what it is. You're going to use the AICP method. You take it through. Is something arbitrary? Is something inconsistent? Does it have bad consequences? How about the preconditions of intelligibility? Can they deal with those? I've chosen several examples from Dr. Jason Lisle's excellent book, The Ultimate Proof of Creation. I had it up on the screen at the very first class. It is a fantastic book, very easy to understand, popular level. Dr. Lisle is a genius. So what we're going to do is we analyze the unbeliever's worldview, even if it's just from a single statement. The C part of the process is a gateway into the discussion. We all remember the C. The C is consequences, and we use the don't answer method. Dr. Lisle reminds us, always use the don't answer strategy. Always answer with gentleness and respect, but never at the expense of the truth. Page 268. He made reference to two important passages, of course, that we need to keep in mind. One of them, 1 Peter 3:15. But in your hearts, honor Christ Lord as holy, or better stated and translated, set apart Christ as Lord. Always being prepared to make an offense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. This is the foundational verse for apologetics. Christ is Lord. We are never to act or speak in a way that would betray that. And we need to be ready to respond to any and everyone. We're now able to do that, and now that we're through the course. And we do so with gentleness and respect. Proverbs 26:4 and 5 is where we get the don't answer method. We talked about that. Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. The two-step approach on the letter C. We're going to apply it to the examples Dr. Lisle has in his excellent book, and then we will address some other examples that you may have. So, first one. Follow the evidence. That's how we titled this one. These are letters that he was sent, well, the Answers in Genesis was sent while he was working there. And it was his responsibility to answer the emails. They proved to be interesting sometimes. First one, think about this. So we'll read it to you and then we'll discuss it. Follow the evidence. This person writes, your denial of basic science will in the long run discredit you and your cause. The empirical evidence is available for all to consider. Your message is akin to asking us to believe the world is flat or that the sun revolves around the earth despite overwhelming empirical evidence to the contrary. All right. So, what do we have in this? He says, the person who wrote this, that they deny basic science. All right. As if there's something wrong with doing that, first of all. You seem to have an objection to this. Why?
Science denies science.
Science denies science. He's also talking about empirical evidence to consider. Again, what's empirical evidence?
Things that you can experience.
Scientific.
Things you can experience, that you can observe with your senses. Exactly. So, all the empirical evidence is going to bring us to a conclusion that is not yours, he claims. You're saying that to believe the world is flat, the sun revolves around the earth. Overwhelming empirical evidence to the contrary. Of course, that's wrapping up a loop that they don't have. So, no, that's not what we're saying. Someone is probably an evolutionist, almost always. But he's used empirical evidence twice in his short message, didn't he? That's very important. We've talked about people that are empiricists, but that you only believe that you can understand something if you can bring it in through your five senses. What's the problem with the empiricist position?
There's so many things that we accept as being true that we can't experience with our senses,
Exactly.
including things that they mention in the letter.
Yes, including things they mentioned in the letter, such as the history of the universe. We haven't observed all of that. So you're basing your empirical observation on something you can't empirically observe. Good. Position destroys the possibility of knowledge. We mentioned that. Let's see. He also believes that you can resolve the debate about evolution versus creation by a neutral investigation of the evidence. Did you get that from that letter? You have the empirical evidence. It's all right here before us. Why can't you come to the right conclusions? Well, there's a reason we don't come to the same conclusions, because we don't have the same starting point. He has completely ignored the reality of one's presuppositions coloring how you're going to interpret the empirical evidence, right? So what would be a good way to respond to something like that? Well, first of all, his claim. What's his first claim?
Do you mean the evidence?
What's his first claim with regard to evidence? Why do you keep ignoring all the evidence? So he's like, well, don't answer. Well, as a Christian, I don't ignore the evidence at all. In fact, I love the evidence. I believe in science. I love science. And I do. Science is cool. I really do, as a Christian. But see, then you can push back on it, flip it around on it. But in your position, why do you expect the universe to be in a state that we can anticipate what's going to happen tomorrow? Why should it be understandable? How could science be possible if all you have is your observation? Because you haven't observed the future. Law of induction, remember? That is going to come back and haunt you.
Well, we can extrapolate from the past.
Can you? Then you're using the law of induction that you haven't justified yet. Oh, crap.
What is the basis?
By the way, for an amazing discussion, I shared this on my Facebook page earlier this week. When was that? Might have been Friday. But apparently at an event, might have been in Georgia, I forget. Durbin was down there for an abortion now. And he got in a conversation with this young man, must have been a college, I think he was a college student. Talked for about 50 minutes and hit one of the best examples of street apologetics I've ever seen. Jeff Durbin is a master of this, and it was just amazing. Talked with him for a while, and eventually started. It's like, okay, yeah, I get it. We can't make any sense out of that without some kind of reference to God. But what is it? But.
What did you just say?
But
Say it again.
it's about 50 minutes worth. It's fantastic. I would definitely recommend listening to it. The issue is not the evidence. Following the evidence, everybody has the same evidence. We've talked about that before. It's how you view the evidence. That's the issue. Who can justify viewing the evidence a particular way? As you rightly said, if everything that you have is based on empirical observation, what did you not observe in the first place? That concept that everything is based on empirical observation, and there are things that we accept, such as laws of logic, that are not empirically observed at all. Very good. Now, let's go to that page. Yes. The next letter's title is Stop Lying to People, I said. Again, these are emails that are sent to Ansys and Genesis. And Jason Lisle is responding to them. This guy is from San Francisco, California. Why am I not surprised by that? He said, how can you honestly deny science and be so ignorant to the obvious truth about our beginnings? I pray you'll have an epiphany and stop misleading people to believe in nonsense and lies. You're ultimately going to turn people off to God. If anyone has half a brain, they're going to look to science for truth, not 4,000-year-old stories written by goat herders. People say things like this a lot. They really do. All right, where are our problems?
Well, they were fishermen, they weren't goat herders.
Yeah, okay, firstly, you don't have your facts straight. One of all. Secondly, that's not an accurate representation of them in other ways, but God communicated his message to people regardless of what they're from. Some were herders, some were fishermen, some were PhD level and educated and very. But what's the center part of his claim? It's really in the title of that, isn't it? Stop lying to people. What does he say? Stop misleading people to believe in nonsense and lies. This looks like, sir, you have a problem with people misleading others.
Why would that be?
Why would that be? Why do you care? If you're an atheist and we're just a bunch of ugly bags of mostly water, a bunch of stardust banging together, what does it matter if one bag of stardust lies to another? Seems like you have something that you understand that innately that goes beyond this. Moral categories. Where does that come from, Mr. Atheist? Remember the example that we gave before? I mentioned, I think it was a bottle of Coke and a bottle of Mountain Dew, or whatever. You shake them up, when you open the tops, they start fizzing. You have a kind of chemical reaction or physical reaction. Take your pick. You could use actual, definitely well chemical reactions like baking soda and vinegar, and one had to light a match on another. Okay, those are chemical reactions. Does it make sense to call one true and the other one false? No. It makes no sense at all. They're just reactions. But the atheist evolutionist is going to insist that our minds are basically the same as our brains and that it amounts to nothing other than chemical reactions. So how do you get true and false? How do you get right and wrong? Where does that come from? Those concepts don't work if all you have is chemical reaction. But Mr. Atheist here is saying that they're wrong for misleading people. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And that is the critical failure in his analysis. All the other weird things that he said, I mean, they misrepresent the position, of course. So the straw manning it that we talked about with regard to the nature of the people to whom God gave his revelation. Denying science, of course, isn't true. You're writing to a science organization that has many credentialed PhD scientists that do actual research and publish things about it and talk about these kinds of things. These are scientists. Just because you don't like how they're doing science doesn't mean that they're not scientists. And of course, the concept of nonsense and lies doesn't work in an unbelieving worldview at all. All right. Let's see. Let's go to this one next. Yeah, there we go. The world is senseless is the next claim in an email that was sent. Ah, that's just lovely. Probably hard to see. Doesn't this kind of sound like the other one? Yes, it does. So why are you writing me if it doesn't matter? Anyway, the world is senseless. Deal with it, he says. This guy from New York. Wow. Coast to coast here. The email says, get over your childish self-pacifying beliefs and deal with the fact that the world is senseless. If perchance there is a God and reason behind this madness, they're certainly not going to be counted in a book as flawed and disgusting as the Bible, unless you perform slavery, misogyny, and the condemnation of billions of people to eternal torment.
That's easy.
That falls apart if we work with it in the last one, doesn't it?
You just slow down.
But this is the way people go about things. What seems to be the case with so many people these days, they will assert an idea of moral relativism that everybody can believe what he wants, but that what they believe about their own position is absolutely true.
So why is misogyny wrong? If the world is senseless.
Exactly. The world is senseless. So why are you writing me an email? How am I supposed to make sense out of it? You don't believe what you're writing me. You wouldn't be writing me if you did, and you wouldn't care what we thought.
Right. Why are you getting so upset if nothing means anything?
Exactly. But the fact that you understand there is meaning, that there is right and wrong, that there is true and false, because what you're saying is you believe what you say is true, what we say is false. Again, where do you get these ideas, Mr. Nothing but chemical reactions? It falls apart in the same place. And the only way to justify it, of course, again, the preconditions of intelligibility is to work with the reality of the one true God who gives meaning to it all. These are the kind of things that we do indeed run across. Let's see, what's the next one? It's just a story. It was just a story. Well, we'll talk about that. Bible is just a story. This guy wrote from Rome. That's kind of cool. This has to stop. The Bible is just a rework of other stories and religions around the time in question. It's insane to keep saying that's the word of God. Just as there's no more a God than Krishna was or Horus was. It's not good for humanity to continue to be so superstitious and ignorant of fact. If no proof the Bible is divine, it's like there's no proof that Sai Baba is divine, that he has followers in millions. The Bible's a forgery, just like the Talmud is a forgery. Wow, that's a lot of claims. We can ask our favorite question. He said, Bible's a forgery. How do you know that? Everybody knows that. Well, then there must be a really good reason why everyone knows that. What is it? Don't ever be baffled. So everybody knows that. Okay, well, everyone knows there's a really good reason for it. What is it? You should know. Humor me.
I don't. Explain.
Explain.
Demonstrate.
We have no proof that the Bible is divine. Actually, there is plenty of proof that the Bible is divine, namely the fact that without the truth of the Bible, you can't prove anything at all. We talked about that. Other stories in question, Krishna, Horus, the idea of Horus is just ridiculous, saying that actually had anything to do with the God of the Bible. There's plenty of refutation for that out there.
Are we going to watch the Horus
I had planned to.
episode?
Reminded we have time. But it's insane to keep saying the Bible is the Word of God. Insane, huh? Where do you get the idea of something that is real or not? Again, your concept of reality. Where is this coming from? How do you know what's real? How do you know what's true? We talked about the nature of truth. All of the traditional philosophical attempts to produce a theory of truth beg the question. There's even no way to call something true and have a concept of truth without the one true God. Once again, they are making use of Christian positions in order to try to argue against the Christian position. It is self-refuting. The next one, he's an atheist. He's moral. Well, I'm glad he's not, killing everyone. We'll skip ahead a little bit. By what standard are you moral, of course, is the question. Where am I here on this? All right, here we go. So I just happened across the article on how to build a bomb in the public school system by David Catchpool. We're not actually building bombs, YouTube. This is just something that I'm reading. I'm not planning on destroying anything. I would just like to know if this article is being absolutely serious. I mean, I just recently graduated without a God, without a love of violence, and yet an understanding of human evolution. Yet where am I confused is, why didn't I shoot all the kids at school? Or why didn't I blow everything up, he says. I'm a sinner after all. One of my favorite bands even has a song titled Shoot the Kids at School. Now, I'm just going to assume you can't answer me. That's why I haven't even killed anyone or graduated school with my friends. I have a good social life. I have a decent education. I'm an atheist after all. The answer is simple, he says. God's not real. He never was. Oh, well, there's a hasty generalization. Wow.
Schools these days.
No, they really don't. So Dr. Lyle's like, let's look at this. This guy obviously has something very confused. Some things in logical class called non sequitur. Just because you do not profess a belief in God doesn't mean you're going to be the most violent person ever.
Yeah.
That doesn't follow. We expect to see more school violence in places that are going to deny the reality of God and therefore meaning. If you tell people they're a bunch of meaningless blobs of biological stuff, they may start believing it and start shooting each other. That happens. But it doesn't mean it's going to happen all the time. It doesn't follow that it's the case in every situation. And after all, we have teachings in Scripture which tell us that God restrains the evil of unbelievers and prevents them from doing the wickedness that they would otherwise do. Prime example is Abimelech and Abraham. When God showed up to a dream after Abraham had basically failed to protect Sarah, Abimelech takes Sarah into his harem, and God shows up at night to him and dreams him. That's a wife of another man. You were a dead man because of it. Oh, I didn't touch her. Yeah, I know, because I kept you from touching her, he says. He had no idea that God had kept him from touching her, but he did. God restrains the wickedness in this world. So this is no problem for the Christian worldview. We believe that God is keeping you from doing terrible, horrible things. Do you have another objection? So that's part. So everything he said is simply doesn't follow.
Well, I mean, even the atheist then I'm moral thing, okay, fine. By what standard? And they'll tell you, well, I haven't killed anybody. That's this guy, right? I've not been violent. I've not accosted anybody. That's the standard. Well, it's a rather low bar of morality, you know.
That's not murdering people. Murder is bad. Don't do that.
But what is the first commandment? If we're going by biblical standards, what's the first commandment? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. So you disobeyed that one. That's pretty basic, considering the first two commandments are related to that. It directly derived from that. So you are violating the first and most important commandment, morality, and you're violating commandments number 1 and 2 of the 10 Commandments. And we could argue about the other ones too, but those clearly you are violating. So by what standard are you moral? Not by the Christian standard. There's never been an atheist alive that's been moral by the Christian standard. There's never been anybody.
Right, no one.
Would they answer that?
Huh?
Would they answer that?
Well, they'd say, well, I don't accept the Bible's morality. And you say, okay, well, what is your morality? And then they'll tell you what their morality is. And why should I accept that morality? Who made you God? And is the appointer of all things moral and immoral? You know?
They base it on laws, don't they?
Well, sometimes they will, or they'll base it on majority
Are you
rules.
guilty
Oh,
of
so like when the majority thought slavery was okay, you're cool with that, right? Like you can't pass judgment on that morality because that diverts to what's known as cultural relativism.
Right.
One of the Achilles tendons of cultural relativism is you can't pass judgment on any other culture's morality because there's no overarching morality by which both can be judged. So
Sometimes it takes a few questions to get to the root of it, but eventually it falls apart because they cannot assert an obligatory moral standard.
not without God.
Exactly. And you need the one true God in order to have an obligatory moral standard.
And if you've got the one true God, then atheists are all immoral. So
So generally speaking, do they have a moral standard?
They'll try to put one
a
forward, but it's not
subjective
one that
moral
holds up.
standard.
It's not one that ever holds up under
They will-
examination.
They make up their own moral standard. But that's where you ask
But
them.
they
That's in AICP, arbitrary. They're being arbitrary by making up their own moral standard.
They're picking and choosing too. I
Sure
don't
they are.
steal, I
Sure.
don't murder.
I pay my taxes.
Yeah. I mean,
That
yeah,
can be
they-
very immoral, actually.
That's one of their
So,
third
I mean,
commandments.
when someone puts something forward like that, you simply say, okay, so what? What do you mean, so what? So why does that matter? Why is your standard mine?
Yeah.
Why are you imposing that on me? I have my standard, you have yours. Why are we even talking?
I like clubbing baby seals. So what's the problem?
They make funny sounds. You shouldn't do that. Why?
So you need another word to describe yourself instead of atheist.
Yeah. It's more like me-theist.
Yeah, that's
Atheist.
really what it comes down to.
You know? It's an autism.
Just as we talked about last week, is anyone who ever sets forward a relative standard, they don't believe in a relative standard. They believe in that person's standard. The me-theist believes in his standard or her standard. He doesn't believe in relativism.
Atheist.
When pressed on it, he cannot make any kind of defense of it because it's indefensible.
Autotheist? Is that what it is?
Out of something.
The self-God. Anyway, sorry.
All right, next one. How could you be so misinformed? Well, there are lots of ways to be misinformed, but
Sure.
this guy's not overly happy. How could a group of individuals be so misinformed and idiotic? Name calling, ad hominem. How did you get the money to build this drivel and nonsense? Talking about the Ark Encounter in the Creation Museum.
I was gonna say,
Well, the Creation Museum, I think this,
he was
yeah,
a pointer.
the Ark Encounter didn't exist yet. How did you get the money to build this drivel and nonsense? The question would be, why is it drivel? How do you know it's nonsense? Elaborate on that for me. My goodness, it's amazing people can be so uneducated in this day and age. You're assuming we're not educated. Why do you think that? Anybody who here can list you his PhD credentials, probably more letters after his name than you ever will. Oh dear. It says incest was okay. You guys are obviously still practicing it. Wow. That's just
Hey, come on now, give this guy some credit for being creative.
very funny stuff. Yeah, we'll laugh at that one for a while.
Wow.
Someday when you grow up, you look back at this and laugh at yourselves. Yeah, well. This starts off with the fallacy of the complex question, double question. How can a group of individuals be so misinformed and idiotic? Well, we're not. First of all, it's not how I'm on top of that. But what's his standard for calling something nonsense? He doesn't have one he can defend. If you're going to talk about something that's nonsensical, you better give me a good reason why. And of course, he's wrong about being uneducated. James White calls Jason Lisle the smartest person he's ever met. So, the guy's crazy intelligent. James White's no dummy. When are you going to accept science? This one I think is fantastic. When you're running into a science organization, you have to laugh at some of these sometimes. Maybe not to the face of the person you're talking to, but afterward you get back like, wow, they really said that. That's pretty neat. Let's see. I need to move my papers here real quick because I'm reading these out of the book. Doing so. All right. Let's see. Where are we?
I think what they're demonstrating is not necessarily that they have any rationale in their arguments. What they're demonstrating is a pathos against Christianity.
Sure.
It's a hatred of God and hatred of things Christian. That's why you get things like the goofy ad hominems,
And that's where all of this comes from. Ultimately, the heart of unbelief is an enmity with God.
It's anger
Neutrality
at
is a
God.
myth, remember? Goes back to what we talked about in the first act. They are not kind of passively saying, well, maybe God's okay, maybe he's not. No. They are enemies of God and therefore are angry with him and hate him.
And to accuse somebody who's a credentialed, in this case, astrophysicist, of being
They're
uneducated.
geneticists,
Oh, I know.
geologists.
They're all
There are tons of people that know their stuff.
that are, they're peer reviewed and published, and,
Yeah.
and it's like,
Brilliant.
we know science very well, thank you. If that's the kind of mentality if that's the sum total of the mentality against it, because let's face it, these people are parroting the arguments that are given to them by their luminaries, the people that are teaching them. You go on the Atheist Bright websites and stuff like that, and that's basically the same kinds of things. They're talking about God as Sky Daddy and all this sort of thing. But they legitimately don't have an argument, so they resort to those fallacious approaches.
Absolutely. That's right. I don't want to throw already. Yes. When are you going to accept science? When are you going to accept science and stop trying to create a new dark age for humanity? That's what we're doing. Your position is so stiff that if everyone were like you, without cars, computers, mathematics, chemistry, geology, archaeology, and any other science, as I write this email to archaeologists and geologists and chemists and geneticists and astrophysicists. Hope you rethink your position and someday humanity can walk together towards progress and prosperity and knowledge. Trying to create another dark age, not the position. So it's an ad hominem. Proceeds with a fallacy called elephant hurling. I mean, talk about that, listing a bunch of fields of science and technology, hoping that a long list will intimidate us to the point that we won't realize it's irrelevant. Elephant hurling. I need to put that one down on the next list. Oh, because, as Dr. Lisle rightly points out, none of the fields of science he listed depend on evolution. Rather, they depend on the Christian worldview in the first place.
Science itself.
Science itself, absolutely. Final sentence, he mentioned knowledge. What do you need to have knowledge?
Fear of the Lord. Basis for it.
A basis for it. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. We're talking about three things necessary. You're going to have to believe something. You have to have a true belief about something, and you have to be able to justify your belief about that. There's going to be a really good reason for it. That reason, of course, is founded in the one true God. Laws of logic are required in order to have knowledge. What's the basis for those? Progress and prosperity. Wow, how do you measure progress? What constitutes prosperity? You can ask a question about any of those things because he's assuming something behind it that honestly most of the time isn't going to square with reality anyway because it's going to be something contrary to how God defines it in the first place. And he won't be able to justify what constitutes prosperity.
Progress presupposes a goal.
Yes, it does.
And so
So
are you
when
telling me that the whole history is teleological, that it's moving toward a goal? How do you get history to be teleological? Therefore, which is a precondition of progress, if there's no God setting the goal? I mean, is the goal set by human beings? And if so, which ones? And why those people?
And it's certainly not set by the evolutionary process.
No,
which
that's
is just a bunch
blind
of bags of stardust. It's blinded, purposeless. It's indifferent, as Richard Dawkins himself has said. Yes,
So when you ask them that question, when are you going to accept science?
that's the email type.
What science are you talking about?
They're asking us that
Yeah,
question.
the unbeliever is asking.
They're
the
asking
Christian.
us.
Yes, that's what this is.
But we could very well turn it around
That's what I'm thinking.
Oh, yeah, easily.
and
Do
ask
they
them that
accept
question. When
a
are you
type
gonna
of
accept?
science,
When are you,
art of science?
when are you gonna accept that there's a precondition for for induction? When are you gonna accept?
But again, the question, how do you know that we should be pursuing prosperity? How do you know what prosperity is? How do you know that things are progressing? How do you know there's a goal? How do you know? How do you know? How do you know? Give the unbeliever enough rope to hang himself, because it will happen. If he wants to argue with you at all. Typically, people who are just in this situation sadly end up ranting and not getting places, but you don't know that unless you ask. All right, page. All right. Here we are. Reliability of senses must come first, this guy says. Okay. So I read an article on your site. Does logic supersede the Bible? While reading it, I got a question of my own. This is what I was thinking about. In order for our observations of the world to be meaningful, the Bible will have to be true. Otherwise, we'd have no reason to think that our senses and memory are reliable. There's uniformity in nature. Okay, that's right. It says, don't I already have to assume that my senses are reliable in order to understand and read the Bible? I either have to use my eyes to read it, my ears to hear it, or if I were blind, I'd use my fingers to read Braille. I'd have to use my brain to understand it and my memory to remember it. So wouldn't my senses have to be reliable in order even to know whether the Bible was right or wrong, or even that its message existed? Thanks in advance for your reply. Okay, this guy's not even necessarily a critic.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't understand. Explain this to me. It's actually a good question. So the question, how do you answer? Well, yeah. In order to read, you're gonna have to be like, your eyes are gonna have to work. Sure. Or your ears have to work to hear it. Yeah. But how do you account for the fact that they're working, or that you can understand things visually or audibly? That's the real question. Not that they work. There's approximate understanding of something and an ultimate understanding of something. Starting point. You have approximate starting point and an ultimate starting point. The ultimate starting point, in order to justify knowledge, in order to justify reliability of senses, any of the preconditions of intelligibility, is going to be the triune God of Scripture, as we talked about in previous classes. But you can read and you can listen, and your senses are going to be generally reliable, even if you don't know that fact. But the reason they are reliable is that fact. So you go with where you are right now, then if you learn later on, oh, this is why that works.
Right.
That's the answer
So
to the
he's
question.
like looking at it backwards, saying that his senses being reliable. How do I want to say this? Basically saying like, well, I have to be able to rely on my senses, therefore, in order to even review the Bible, I have to be able to first accept that these things are true. But if you accept that those things are true without the Bible, then it's all a mess. Because
Sort of, yeah.
if you were relying on your senses, then you're back to empiricism and saying like, oh, well,
Right.
I can only know things that I can experience with my senses.
Anytime you're dealing with a presupposition of any sort, such as reliability of your senses or the ability of any of those kinds of things, you're going to have to assume it before you can critique it. Okay, well, let's assume this is true for it, and then let's analyze it, do an internal critique, and find out why. Obviously, we're going to need to read. Okay, so why is it that you can read? How do you know that your senses are reliable? Well, God has created a world where we're going to do that. The issue of dominion, the issue of giving us a printed, written text of His Word, that we might read it, that we might listen to it. So our senses are going to have to work because He had a purpose in giving it to us that we might know Him and understand. If that's going to be the case, then we would expect our eyes need to work in order for that to be true. So your eyes do work because the Bible is true, not because you read it or believe it. Those are two different things. And that's a big hang-up for people. Christians even get hung up on that for a long time. The difference is between the Bible being necessarily true and you believing it to be true. You don't have to believe it to be true, but it has to be true in order to be able to account for everything that you take for granted. That's the difference. Very, very important difference.
The Bible is true whether or not you can see it, read it, hear it,
Exactly.
etc.
Because you need the truth of it in order to justify any of those things. Very important. I knew I included that on purpose. That's just a funny statement. That was the title of this new email. It's this one. Science and presuppositions. Really? None? No one has any? Wow. Of course, what's the huge, glaring, unable to overcome objection and presupposition that science has that they have to have in order to use it at all? The atheist, it's a problem anyway. Did you say it?
Induction.
Induction. All science relies on induction. Any of the fields that he mentioned are just science in general. If you're going to be able to experiment on anything or know
You
the
haven't
future
seen
at all, you haven't seen it, so you have to have a principle by which you can project into the future.
You've not seen causality.
No.
You've seen things happen in the same order at approximately the same time. One following the other, but you've not seen cause.
That is correct.
You've assumed cause. You've assumed a causal relationship between the two things that you've seen or experienced. You've not experienced cause itself.
Let's see. There's one more. That one just gets knocked down really fast. Oh. We don't need to go into this one too deeply either. We can do some other class examples. Some supernatural explanations must be excluded.
On what scientific basis?
Like why? Because they're not scientific. How are they not scientific?
Supernatural.
Have you watched Ghostbusters?
Do
I mean,
it.
seriously.
The point is the entire claim, the supernatural explanations must be excluded from an explanation of something, is an arbitrary claim. There's no good reason for it. It is conjectural bias, or unargued bias, I should say, that we talked about before. They're arbitrary. They just don't want to deal with the supernatural, which is why they claim. But that comes up a lot. People have this objection a lot, but it's just those were some of the examples that I wanted to bring up.
Well, that's
I do have a question.
Yes, that was my next part. Question.
Some of these examples, you said, one of them was, I'm atheistic but I'm moral.
Yeah, that is the claim of the unbeliever in that case.
Okay, now, then you went down to, let's see. How are you going to accept science? So, and you said they were asking us. Now,
Right.
what about, who's saying I'm atheistic and I'm moral though?
Well, the atheist is going to claim that he's moral.
So you were jumping back and forth who we were asking these to?
Not really. All the
No,
letters
we
I
aren't
was giving you
asking-
basically titles of emails that were sent to Answers in Genesis that Jason Lisle was responding to. That's what
But they all come under his examples?
there are the examples that Dr. Lisle provided in his book. That was just a few.
But they were
That's a
just
whole bunch.
titles of emails.
Yes.
Yeah. Hate mail, basically, that his ministry got.
Most of it, not all of it. There were a couple that people were actually asking
Legitimate
good questions,
questions, yeah.
but most of the time they just wanted to fly out the handle and insult them, or claim that they weren't doing science when they're a science organization, or attack the person, not the argument, or load it with double questions, or not justify their own biases and make radical claims that simply have no basis in reality. That's what it comes down to.
There's a quote from David Hume regarding, and this is so funny because he's talking about books. He's talking about empiricism, and he says this: if we take in our hand any volume or book of divinity or school of metaphysics, for instance, let us ask, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? No. Does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence? No. Commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. So only things that
That's a
contain
radical skepticism.
so anything that doesn't contain experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence, experimental being the key point there, right? Or abstract reasoning concerning quantity and number. If it doesn't contain those things, then commit it to the flames.
So then, should his statement be committed to the flames?
Precisely.
Yes, that right there.
Because his statement
Doesn't
contain any of those things. It's completely
So
arbitrary.
why did you write this
So
down? Why did you look at your
disregard
mouth?
everything I just said.
Exactly.
On the
Move forward.
basis of, yes.
Let the unbeliever talk enough and he hangs himself. Even someone like that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, how absurd.
Yeah, there are all kinds of things like that. They're just so fun to
That's what happens with any kind of secular philosophy. It doesn't matter. It all falls apart. All right, we're at the end of the slideshow. Anything that anyone wanted to mention, to discuss further that we talked about at any point over anything? I will do my best. I will admit I'm very
How do you remember all that information, talking to one person?
Well, the best thing to remember when you're talking to one person is, obviously remember the AICP method. That's really important.
The what?
The AICP method, arbitrary, inconsistent consequences and preconditions. Keep that, memorize, make sure you know that, make sure you know how to deal with it, make sure you know how to ask questions. Don't accept anything or let anything be taken for granted, because that's, again, I guess you're using that method to do it, but you ask the question, well, how do you know? Well, why do you think that? Or how do you understand this? Or how can you know this? This is just immoral. Well, how do you know what makes something moral or not? Why do you think this is immoral? What's your basis for that? Because that's, morality is one of the preconditions of intelligibility. You have to have it. And the illustration we gave before, absolute morality is necessary. No, it's not. Yes, it is. Well, how do you know that, Christian? Well, if I go down to the supermarket and I get a pound of ground beef, then I'm allowed to charge $50 for it. And they won't. And if they tried, the manager would stop them. And if the manager didn't stop them, we'd have a case to go to the police about it. Those kinds of things. Nobody can operate without an absolute morality. Theft is wrong. Stealing is wrong. Now tell me, how do you know that stealing is wrong and why is it wrong? As a Christian, I have no problem with that. That's easy. It's our God's character. It's His revelation of Himself to us, and He's given it to us, written it into us, so we understand it's wrong. You put it on tablets and stone on Mount Sinai, Exodus 20. How do you justify it? That's what I thought. But it gets down to any one of those things. Morality, again, is my personal favorite one, because that one leads so easily into the gospel. Because, okay, but this law, this that you understand, you know is wrong, they can only be accounted for by my God. This God hates it when people steal. We've all stolen. He keeps wrath and stores that up for His enemies, and judgment against those who break His law. But Jesus kept the law perfectly, died on behalf of sinners that they might be saved. Believe in Jesus Christ, have forgiveness of sin, and only in Him. And He will see you as righteous as Jesus, because God credits to you the righteousness of Jesus the Christ. And washes all of your sins away. It's glorious. And all of that because you thought that there was just no such thing as morality. Inspiration about ground beef and Kroger. Kroger always comes up. Why does that keep happening? They're just down the street from my house. I see. But yes, but ask those questions. Run through AICP. Ask, how do you know? And eventually, the unbeliever will have enough rope to hang himself. And his opposition will hang itself. And will devolve to arbitrariness, inconsistency, bad consequences, or a claim to the preconditions when they have no such claim to them. And I guess emphasizing it, don't take anything for granted. Talked about that a few times. You have to be comfortable arguing against the things that you yourself believe in, because the unbeliever will assume them. Stealing is wrong, but he won't have a reason for assuming, a basis for it, because I say so. No, you believe stealing is wrong. I do. The guy halfway around the world does. We all have that same understanding. Explain that. I can tell you why. How can you? Questions, comments, thoughts, or considerations?
I almost found the clue,
You almost found those.
but yeah.
Well then. This has been alright. It's like I told some of you when we started this, I consider this one of the most important things that we put together, because how important it is to be able to get an answer for the hope that is within us. Unbelief attacks from every side, but they don't have anything substantial to say. And they will try to bully you into the corner and push back on you, but it all amounts to nothing but fluff. They can't justify why they're so angry at you for believing in this God. Why are you angry about it if it doesn't matter? Because you're really an enemy of this God. You don't want to deal with it because you're suppressing that knowledge. We don't have any reason to be afraid of them. We don't have any reason to think that they actually have something substantial to argue against the one true God and His word, because they don't. So we can stand with confidence and share the truth of God and His word without doubt. And then, having destroyed their arguments, offer the hand and say, I was there too. Way out to save your soul, for forgiveness of sin, and to save your reason. Is Jesus the Christ, who is God over all forever for His son. That's the confidence we have, friends, brothers and sisters. Let's get more into it. Now we pray. We'll stop the stream. There may be those other top videos for Jehovah's Witnesses, because they're very helpful. Let's pray. All Our Lord and God, you are glorious. Thank you for this class. Thank you for the confidence and encouragement we receive through it. Thank you that you have provided a sure foundation in your word for any and everything in the Christian life, to include defending the faith and proclaiming your message. I pray that we would do so with confidence and remember the things to work together for the advancement of your kingdom in this world as part of Indianapolis and Christ in the South Side here. Pray in Jesus' holy